Hello class, and welcome to week number 5. A reminder, if you haven't already taken your exam number 1, this Tuesday is the last day to take that. I want to make sure that you know what topics are covered. So I'm going to go back to not the Help Center, the course information, and look at the course schedule. So the pacing guide has everything that we've covered up to this point. And I'm going to go through and just list through some of the things. We covered solving a system of linear equations. We've covered equations that have two different variables and with two different equations. And we have various methods of solving them. We can solve them by graphing the equations. The way we graph a line is to find at least 2 points and then connect the points to make that line. That's one way of graphing an equation. We can also use the slope-intercept method to graph an equation, y is equal to mx plus b, and after you graph your two lines, they're either going to cross at one point, or they're going to overlap each other and cross at an infinite number of points, or they're going to be parallel to each other and not cross and have a solution at all. The other method that we have is the method of substitution. A lot of you liked using that method. And my favorite method is actually using the addition method. Another name for the addition method is the elimination method, because what we're doing is eliminating one of the variables. So that's solving a system of linear equations. And then you should go back and review the rules for exponents. Exponents has rules, and as long as you know what an exponent means, you're in pretty good shape. You don't have to memorize the rules. In order to add and subtract, we have to have like terms. And in a polynomial or in any term, the only way we can have like terms is if we have exactly the same variables and exactly the same exponents. Then we can just add and subtract based on the coefficient in front of the terms. Now here is the most important of all topics, I think, in this class, is factoring polynomials. So we looked at various methods. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that when you are factoring any polynomial, it doesn't matter how many terms that polynomial has. If it has 2 terms or 3 terms or 4 or even more, the first thing you want to do is see if there is a greatest common factor. So see if you can factor out a greatest common factor. And then there are other things you're going to look at. If there are 4 terms in your polynomial, the best way to consider factoring is, after you find the greatest common factor, is to factor by grouping. If you have any questions about the grouping method, by all means ask. Ask before you go in for that test if you haven't taken it yet. Factoring trinomials of the form x squared plus bx plus c or ax squared plus bx plus c, whether or not there is a coefficient in front of that x squared term. And I believe I have posted an example of how you can factor any polynomial of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, if you wind up with a perfect square trinomial, such as x plus 4 times x plus 4, that is a good factoring, but to factor completely, we want to rewrite that as x plus 4 squared, quantity squared. So make sure you don't lose any points for not factoring all the way. Then we have binomials, and we have various ways to factor binomials, again after pulling out the greatest common factor. We can have the difference of squares, we can have the difference of cubes, and we can have the sum of cubes. If we have the sum of squares, it's not factorable. The only way we could possibly factor the sum of squares is by pulling out a greatest common factor. So, factoring binomials, those are your 3 possibilities, and I posted an interesting factoring of a difference of cubes in the announcement, so take a look at that. Then solving an equation by factoring. We're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring if that quadratic, which is the definition of a quadratic equation, is set equal to 0. So if it is set equal to 0, we can then factor the one side of the equation, and once we have factors, 2 things that are multiplied together to be equal to 0, we know that one of those factors has to be equal to 0. So once we have factored, we can then satisfy the solution to that equation by setting each of the factors equal to 0 and solving those mini equations. The last method we have for solving a quadratic equation at this point is to use a quadratic formula and complete the square. If you have questions about those two methods, please feel free to ask. These topics are probably going to be the most useful to you when you go on to Math 121. Knowing how to factor and feeling comfortable with factoring is what's going to get you through Math 121. So I want to make sure you know how to do that. And then after you complete the test, we are going on to our Week 5 work, rational expressions. What's another word for rational expressions? They're fractions. Basically, a rational expression is a term that looks like a fraction. And we're going to be looking at these various topics to begin with. And we're getting close to the end of doing study skills. So here we're going to be talking about a study skill for how we did on our test. And you'll have a pretty good idea of how you did on your test even before it's graded. And I'll certainly let you know when I have received the tests back. It does take a while to get the tests from all the different campuses, and I will post when I have them, and I will post the grades as soon as they are graded. If you have any questions in the meantime, I want to go back again to the content area where we have, not the pacing guide, but I want to go back to our course material, the proctored exam, and remind you that the handwritten review is a really good introduction to what the test is going to look like. So you're going to have your handwritten review. I don't need to see those pages. I do need you to write out each of the questions, solve them, showing every step, get good practice showing your work, and then going to the answers and checking your work. If you have any problems wrong, please be sure, first of all, to grade your handwritten review. So if you've got 2 wrong, and I don't remember how many questions there are on there, you want to grade yourself, let's say 48 out of 50, and then turn that into a percentage. And then go back, and anything that you got wrong, go ahead and correct them. Now, if you don't know how to fix any of the problems that you got wrong, just ask. The whole purpose of this is to help you learn the material that's necessary and to make sure that you do understand anything that you may have some confusion about. So doing this handwritten review is not just extra work, it's to help make sure you do well on the test. Remember, it must be completed by this Tuesday, so check the times that your testing center is open and go in there allowing at least 2 hours. Make sure you get there before 2 hours before their closing time. Make sure you bring a calculator with you and your handwritten review, and please bring an envelope, self-addressed and stamped. A manila envelope will hold your review as well as your test, and I'll send it back to you with corrections so that you can use these for studying for the final exam, because that time will be here before you know it. Thanks for listening, and hope you have a good run at the exam. Let me know if you have any questions.